Hey everybody, let's take a look at some work. This first one's from Theodora. They submitted a couple days ago. I gave them some feedback, and this is another iteration of that. This is the reference from Tree of Life, and I think you've pretty much nailed the reference to me. I feel like it's feeling very similar to the reference. I think your color choices and your palette and the way you've set up the lighting scenario feels really good and feels really close to what they've got going on here. I think, from here, there's a few things that I might try that, to me, in terms of making an image, plussing an image even more. Maybe it'll go away a little bit from the reference, but this is probably what I would do. But I would say at this point you've already kind of nailed what you were going for, I think. So where you proceed from here is sort of up to your own taste, in my opinion. But for the sake of giving some feedback and sort of pushing the image, at least how I would push it for my own work. This is how I would probably go about that. I think the first thing, and this is not a lighting thing, it's more of a materials thing, but there is some warmth that I think we're missing slightly from here to here. And I think it's just simply the subsurface on his face. I think if you can kind of get that going, even just a bit of it, so you see a little bit of red where, on his nose and on his eyes and his lips. Not too far, obviously. You want it to feel natural, and this is pretty subdued, but, I feel like that's the main thing for me. That's sort of, if I had to try to improve one thing, it would probably be the materials there. I realize this is not a shading a program, so if not, that's fine. I think the lighting is working pretty well, but I think lighting and shading go very closely together. I think that would just benefit you to have a more skin-like material on there. The other thing I think for me right now, his character lighting, I think the direction you've chosen for the shaping feels pretty good. I do feel like for thinking about this as the motivating source, it does feel a little bit high to me, and I think you probably wanted to get that to get this nice Rembrandt triangle and shaping on his face, which you've done a nice job. I think it's just the top of his head especially the lighting feels a little bit unmotivated there. So what I've done here, this is rough obviously, but just kind of dimming down the lighting on the top of his head and sort of concentrating it more down here, and then spilling, wrapping it just a little bit more over, to sort of give a little bit more fill onto his face. I think that might help it feel a little bit more like it's being lit through this diffusion lampshade and onto his face. The next thing is, I think the coffee cup is getting quite hot down here. This is nitpicky, but I think we don't really care about his coffee cup that much. We want to feel it, but we don't want it to be like, that this is almost the most high contrast area between the coffee cup and the shadow on his shirt. So I would probably look at seeing if you can knock down the coffee cup a bit. So I did there. This is just a little bit of bloom. I think it might be nice. I know that the reference does not have it. I think this is shot on film. I'm not sure. But I do think a little bit of halation kind of just takes the CG edge off slightly for me. So I almost always like to include it just a little bit. You know, it's easy to go overboard with this stuff, but you know, I like a little bit of it just to sort of make it feel a little bit more natural. On that same note, maybe some grain would help as a post process on top of everything to sort of really make it feel like the reference, if that's what you're going for. This one is interesting. You know, usually the way I light for my job for animation is that we generally don't want to let the shadows go too gray. And you know, for my own personal taste, I don't really have that much of an issue with it, especially if you're going for a sort of look like this. But you know, generally, I'm in the habit of sort of making sure the shadows feel somewhat saturated and doesn't go gray. That's what I did here. I think this is up to you. It's not in the reference, but just maybe a suggestion. And then, yeah, this is just a little bit of a vignette, more just to focus the eye here. So, you know, really minor changes, I think, that I'm suggesting. This is yours, and this is the paint over. Just all to focus and sort of feel that lighting a little bit better. The motivated lighting. I also wonder now that I was thinking maybe you can warm up the light just a little bit, but I feel like you've nailed the color palette pretty well, so maybe you don't need to do that. But yeah, I honestly think the biggest visual thing that you could do is probably get some subsurface on him. And then, you know, I love feeling this sort of like warmth through the newspaper here. It's like, I think the reflected light off of him coming through the paper, that's like not kind of this warm gray. That's what it looks like to me. It would be nice to feel maybe a little bit of translucency slightly on the paper. That could be kind of cool. So where it sort of, you know, it's nice that it goes kind of peachy like this. But obviously I know, you know, we're not in a super backlight scenario with this, so you're not going to feel that quite as much. Just a thought. But yeah, this is a great job. I think all the stuff from now on is sort of up to your own taste, because I think if your goal was to match the reference, I think you've done a really good job with that. So great job. This one is from Shadow Crayon. We looked at this a few days ago. A different iteration of this, this is the new one. This is the old one. And this is the reference. Personally, I think maybe you've taken the key light a little bit slightly too high for the reference. I think it's tough with this character. It's so different than what this guy's shaped like. But it might be slightly too high. You see, like, the key is kind of sort of restrained only to that area here. I would probably bring it down a bit, just so, you know, you kind of get more shaping like this. And the key light, the rim light, I feel like is working pretty well, but I also think it can probably maybe come down a bit, just so you get more like this sort of thing. Just so, you know, I feel like we don't want it to feel super even in terms of, you know, it's half blue, half this warm light. I in my opinion, I feel like it's nicer to sort of bias one key light, which would probably be this warm light. So maybe just take a look at bringing this down just slightly, and then bringing both lights down just a little bit. It won't take much. This is more of like, you know, they say like do it with a feather rather than a hammer. I would say this is more of a feather note. You know, somewhere in between these two for both lights, to be honest. Or actually, for the key light, somewhere in between these two, and for the rim just down slightly. But yeah, I think after you do that, I would encourage you to sort of move on from this exercise to more complex shapes. Not that this is not a great exercise to do, but I do feel like you've kind of explored what the lights do. I think when you're trying to get character shaping like this, and trying to practice that, it might be good to sort of, after you've taken all you can from this exercise, to sort of you know, get more complex shapes going. Yeah, I think one more thing, I think you can soften out these lights quite a bit. Right now they feel like the shadows cast are so hard, especially like this one here, and it's just making some strange shapes on the face and this ear as well. I think if you know, you made the shadows softer, which you can achieve by, you know, making the lights bigger, basically, or changing the angle of the lights, or mostly increasing the size of the source of the lights. I think if you can do that, it might feel a little bit less harsh on this character's face. You won't get quite so many like hard lines. This is a bad paint over, but I think you can understand what I'm getting at. You know, usually softer light is a little bit more flattering. You don't want to go super soft because you won't get these like really nice shapes that we're getting on him, but I think slightly softer than what you have might be great. But yeah, good job, good progress. I think, you know, try to maybe hit these notes, and then maybe see what you can do with a bit more of a complex character. But this is an awesome exercise to sort of mess around with and learn a lot. So great job. This one's from Tessa. We looked at this a few times, but I do think this is really successful now. Honestly, I don't have too much more. I can nitpick things if you'd like. I think in terms of the general sort of like lighting structure and how you've placed everything, I feel like he's sitting pretty well in here. So the nitpicky stuff, I'll just run through some of them. I think this eye, this back eye here, you know, we always run into this. This is a very common issue, but I think this specular highlight on the back eye is really bright and really distracting. So I would take that down there, just so it's not so bright there. I would also take down this bright spot on, you know, between his collar and his shirt. You just don't want the audience to sort of like get caught up in the tiny things that are distracting from your story. Honestly, I would maybe recommend to just try to get rid of them completely in comp or whatever you need to do, just so that the silhouette read feels better. And then I wonder if there's a way to sort of make this cane pop, you know, a little bit from his body. You might be able to sort of play up this sort of it's going to be a cheat because it's obviously nestled quite well within his body, but I feel like if you play up this light source coming through the wing here and onto the cane, it already has some of that. I think if you brighten that, I think you can really pop that cane out. You know, you don't want it to be like the first read or anything like that, but I do think it'd be nice to sort of be able to read the cane more, just because it feels like a pretty important part of his character here. So let me see if we just do something a little bit crazy. See if it works. This is probably too much, but you know, just something to sort of read it, just so it doesn't get lost in inside of the silhouette of his body. You know, you see what I mean? Like this kind of thing, at least you can sort of start to understand what is going on here, and what's in here. So, oh, and there's a gem on here, so maybe you can pop that just a little bit, just so, you know, yeah, so I don't know, that sort of makes it feel a little bit more legible to me. Just even small things like that. So yeah, so this, the cane, I think this hit of light on his hat also is quite bright. So I would probably try to take the speck off, that speck dot off, and sort of maybe even dim it down on his hat slightly, just so, you know, we're not distracted by this huge hit of light that's brighter than anything on his face, which is what, you know, ideally we would be looking at. But yeah, last thing is how bright this reflection is. I would probably knock that down, just so it's not distracting. But as you can tell, small stuff. I think, yeah, he sits in really well. I think it's just like, you know, I can nitpick stuff. Anyone can nitpick stuff forever. But, you know, in terms of the overall image, which is the most important thing, in my opinion, I think it's working really well. So, yeah, maybe just clean up some stuff, and then I think you're good to go on this one. And thanks for doing a higher quality one. This is, I think, enough to really read the details. So, appreciate that. But great job. Thanks. This one is from Samuel. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. But this is a couple of shots from here. So yeah, I love this idea. I think what you've got going is really funny. I think lighting wise, I think the character feels a little bit glowy to me. It might be a little bit too much subsurface, or, you know, he's getting really filled in, and really red. And with his shirt, it's like he's just kind of like a glowing red light. I would say reduce some of the fills on him. Really let that, you know, you have this key light coming in, the sunlight coming in over here, which is nice. And then, you know, all this stuff, there's more shadow, a little bit more shadow over here than there is on his face. I would say let that key light play on him. I think the position of it is pretty good, it feels. And then probably take down some of the fills and the more ambient lights, just so it's not quite so even and flat across his face. You know, not too much, obviously. I think all this stuff is quite filled in, but you see the shadow back here versus, you know, how it feels a little bit overlit on this side of his face, for what's going on back here. And this is a common thing in animation. I feel like things are often overfilled, which sort of is a little bit of a detriment to the shaping of the characters and what the characters actually look like. So, you know, maybe try to sort of knock that down and see how you feel about this. I think it'll help with the read of the character and making him not feel quite so glowy here. This is a funny idea. I think there's something, I like the idea of it popping out to sort of a, not a fantasy, but like, a not real place. And you've done stuff with his eyes, which is kind of cool, and these gradients, which are interesting. I do feel like maybe you're not getting as much of a pop from these as you would want. I think the red on red on red is maybe not contrasty enough to sort of get you that shift that you're looking for. I think a common thing, I had a shot like this in Strange World, actually. I hope I don't get copyright striked. But basically it's a fantasy sequence where, there's this character Ethan turns into his grandfather, and then this is sort of like a nightmare for his dad. And you can see, how different the lighting is in both scenarios. And I think, what you can do here to sort of maximize that pop is that light him differently. I think he is kind of being lit differently it looks like from right to left more than the last one, but I think it's not pushed enough. I think if you're really going for this sort of like, demonic sort of evil lighting, you could go, with a classic sort of lit from the bottom look. That would be kind of fun. I think maybe just play around more with what sorts of different things can you do with the lighting scenario to sort of push this moment even more. Because I think these white lights that you have, I think, aren't quite selling it to me as much as it could be sold, in my opinion. So maybe mess around with that, and then, this cut back to this will be funnier and more impactful with that. And then after you do that, take a look at how the gradient feels. I'm not sure how it would feel, how you want to light him. You might have to choose the gradient or whatever's going around in the background to be kind of matching what you do here. So, like, for example, if I lit him from the bottom with red lights or green lights or like a spooky blue light, maybe you would even go black in the background, or like some fog or something in the background. That could be kind of interesting, just to really bring it away from, have a bigger contrast between these scenes and these scenes. But again, this is what I assume is your story for this scene. So whatever serves that story, I think, is the correct choice. But I do think some bigger contrast between these two scenes would have a bigger impact. And yeah, this one, I think same thing. I think is just getting a little bit too filled in, and he looks kind of a little bit gummy here. So getting more less fill on him, I think would be nice. But yeah, I think your structure's there. I think this is working quite well. I think it's just a matter of really pushing it to tell the story. But yeah, awesome job. Okay. This is a reel from Samuel. Oops. Okay, let's take a look. I really liked these first few projects, especially. I think, they were looking really nice. This workbench stuff is really cool. Compared to your reference, I would say there may be slightly too hazy. It feels a little smoky in there. I love the haze. I love Atmo and haze and everything. I think maybe it just feels it could do with slightly more contrast. So localizing the haze a little bit more to the light sources, I think, might help with that. It just feels, this feels good to me. I think this feels good. I think it's just these closer up shots. Everything sort of feels the same value. So I think knocking back the haze a little bit would help sort of us see more shadows and get a little bit more contrast into the scene. Same with this one. But overall, I think they're looking great. This is cool, Alan Wake. This one is interesting. I would probably put the play the clip before you wipe the layers, in my opinion, just because you're sitting here, without a lot of context, looking at these wipes. Yeah, so here your character lighting is looking nice on them. My only thing with this scene was I got really distracted by the shadow. And I think, it's coming at a weird, the sun is coming in at an angle such that the shadow is moving so fast compared to her in space. It just looks a little odd to me. And it just took my eye, distracted me from your character lighting. And then here as well, it's quite active there. It's not as bad as in the beginning when it really shoots across the screen. I like, the color in your shadows and the key light and everything. It's just the shadow that's bothering me. And I was trying to think about what to do to sort of mitigate that without changing your lighting setup too much. And I wonder, if you could, the light's coming in through what I assume is a window over here. If you could block off this, put a shadow here, a soft shadow that's sort of kind of like how this is on this side of the wall. However you want to do that by blocking the light or whatever. He might pop more from the wall in that case if you have a gradient shadow coming from left to right. And then her shadow, if I play it, her shadow could, you might see it here, which is fine, and then it sort of melds with that other shadow, just so you don't get quite so crazy of a shadow shape. It's a bit of a cheat, but I think it might help you with sort of this distraction issue of the shadow here. The other alternative is sort of making a different light for her or a different light for the environment. It's always tricky. I think these, you kind of want it to feel real. You don't want to cheat too much, but there's instances like these where there's stuff on screen that's distracting my eye from the story that's supposed to be going on. So yeah, I think however you want to achieve that. It was more just knowing that the shadow is a little bit problematic to me. I love these. These are really nice. The skin feels really good, and it's nice that to be able to see that you can do character lighting and you understand shaping and stuff like that. So that's all working. These are all working really well, in my opinion. My only thing with these, critique with this, was that this sort of the animation of the reference going down like that is just a little too slow. I think it's I kind of wish it was faster. I understand what you're trying to do, but you could maybe, I don't know if we need to see this full screen. Honestly, I think we could just start here Or if you do want to go full screen, maybe you go full screen and then you just cut to this. That might work as well. But in terms of the work, I really like these. I think you did a great job on these. So, yeah, awesome job. I think all this stuff looks really good. I think you've got environment stuff, you've got character stuff, you've got animated stuff. I think this is a great reel. I think one thing maybe that you could think about including as you kind of go on in your journey is seeing how you can sort of integrate more effects stuff. That might be kind of interesting to see, and might round out your reel a little bit more, but it does depend on what sort of jobs you're going for. I think if you're going for compositing jobs as well, I think having some things with effects elements and stuff like that could be really good to sort of round this out. But the length feels good, about a minute. That seems right to me. And I think once you kind of speed these up slightly, I think it'll feel really good. So awesome job with this. I think, yeah, it's really strong. And lastly, this is from Erica. We've seen this a few times, this one, but you keep making great updates, which is awesome. And I don't have too much more to add to this. I honestly think it's feeling really good. I think you've made those changes really quickly, and all your changes feel like you've done them to the right amount, to my eye. I would say just maybe it's time to move on to the next project. This is feeling really good to me. I'm not sure I have too much more to add here. If I was being really nitpicky, I wonder if that eye ding is like 15% too bright, but it's not a big deal. I think it's feeling nice, the placement and the warmth of it. But yeah, nothing much more to add. I would say, if you want to make small changes that you want to make, that you think could improve the image, go ahead and do those. But in terms of what critiques on the lighting, I feel like this is working really, really nicely. Awesome job. Love to see all the updates. Thanks, everybody.